With my high-tech flip phone, I can now access everybody's cell phone within the vicinity and hack into their social media accounts. What will be my first act of cyber terrorism? Hey everyone, David here. So one of the things that people were looking forward to with the next generation of consoles, whether it be the PlayStation 4 or Xbox One, was games that were able to utilize the technology to look very much next gen, to the point where they look very photorealistic. Basically, all the stuff that Blizzard would do with their cutscenes, you know, World of Warcraft, StarCraft, those cutscenes that are very realistic, the Diablo games, all those cutscenes that look amazing. People wanted that to be the actual in-game stuff with this next generation of consoles, and one of the games that were revealed back in, I believe, 2012 that made people believe that, oh my god, that was going to be the future, was a little game called Watch Dogs. Well, after many delays and after being off my radar for about maybe a year or so, I managed to finally play it for the PlayStation 4, and so here I am to review Watch Dogs. And in Watch Dogs, you play as a brilliant hacker named Aiden Pierce, who unfortunately suffers from a traumatic family tragedy that happened in his past, and so now, about a year after that event, he's trying to figure out why that event exactly happened, who exactly is connected to it, and using his brilliant talents to be able to hack CTOS, which is this operating system that controls pretty much everything inside of the city of Chicago, to his advantage to be able to find out who is behind all that. And I really enjoyed the story for this game. It was this good sense of mystery, you know, all this hacker lingo of trying to figure out backdoors and whatnot. It's kind of like a neo-noir mystery, but brought to the new millennium, and bringing in all this technology and all this terminology about hacking and how that all works. It's very interesting stuff that really made me wanting to find out more about how hackers work. How there's organizations like Lizard Joy or Anonymous, I believe, who are these anonymous people who are hacking all these different companies and whatnot, and some of them do them to be douchebags, to steal stuff from other people, and that's bad, but then others simply just do it for the fun, and Watch Dogs genuinely brought that to my attention. I mean, I know that's always been there, but there's stuff about the story for Watch Dogs that made me interested in hacking. And again, the actual narrative for the story was very interesting, and what made it even more interesting are the band of characters that you find along the way. And some of the supporting characters actually managed to steal some of the spotlight more than others. My favorite in particular will have to be Jordy Chin here, who just, I love him. I just wish he had more screen time in the game, but in my opinion, he was my favorite out of the bunch. It sticks. Now notice I said that the supporting characters are the ones that steal most of the spotlight. That's because, unfortunately, your main character, Aiden Pierce, is not grandiose, to say the least. I mean, some people bashed him as being quite boring and bland, and I wouldn't say boring. I wouldn't say he was a bad character. In fact, I actually kind of liked him and sympathized with him because of the tragic event that he faced a year prior to the events of this game. But I do wish he had a little bit more characterization, some more dimension, some more color to his character, because the majority of the time he's talking with that grasply voice. I need to hack into the account and get access. I have this dark, tragic past, therefore I must walk in the rain with my hat and my scarf blowing in the wind. I say most of the part because there are some scenes where he interacts with his family or even some of his colleagues, especially that Jordy Chin character, in which his voice actually lightens up a little bit, and I'm like, I actually want to see more of that lighten up Aiden. And he's not necessarily the only issue with the story for this game. There's a couple of issues mainly towards the end of the game, because the pacing was doing rather well. There was this good villain that I sincerely disliked. I was like, oh, why do you have to be so snarky, mother... Anyways, it was doing rather well. I can barely find any issues with the story until the very end, to where there are some contrivances. There's this element that comes out of nowhere that's very convenient. I'm like, wow, why was this not mentioned earlier? because there were some clear-cut opportunities to take advantage of this one element, and yet at the very end of the game it says, "Oh, look, there it is." I'm like, okay, why was that not there earlier in the game? And this character makes this turn towards the end that is left a little ambiguous, which I don't mind, but the turn itself, I was like, oh, why'd you have to go there, Watch Dogs? Now, the look of the game is the one thing that I'm pretty sure everybody was talking about back when this game was first unveiled, because if you remember what I just said in the beginning of this review, this was the game that a lot of people, proponents of both the PS4 and Xbox One whole year prior to their releases, were counting on to demonstrate how next-gen games can be. Because when that thing unveiled, people were like, oh my god, look at the physics, look at the lighting, look at all that, and people were blown away. Then the game came out, the reviews started to pour out, and people were like, it looks not necessarily nothing like what was unveiled, but there were an onslaught of comparison videos saying this is what you were expecting, this is what you ended up with. And in my opinion, the game still looks great. There's some advancements in technology that I'm sure couldn't have been possible in the last gen systems, and I'm pretty sure that despite getting also a last gen release with PS3 and Xbox 360 simultaneous with PS4 and Xbox One, I'm sure the PS4 and Xbox One versions look a tad bit better than the last gen consoles. Now, with that being said, I will admit there's nothing groundbreaking about how this game looks, except that they found a way to film it to make it look like it's actually rather cinematic. Every time there's a cutscene, I feel like this could be lifted out of a movie or even a TV show. Oh, and along with that, the entire city of Chicago feels like a living, breathing city. There's this other series, this other video game series that I feel Watch Dogs models itself after quite an awful lot, and I'll talk about that later with the gameplay. But in terms of how it looks and how it reacts to you, the city feels very much alive. Every time you're running down the street, people react to you, being that you're this vigilante going throughout the city, hacking into systems, and whether it be for good or bad, people take notice. And so the city and its citizens respond to you, not just because of the fact that you're hacking it, but also because people within it are also affected by it. And so whenever you pass by somebody, you'll hear their conversations, you hear them talking amongst each other and to you whenever you do bump into them or something like that. And the entire city is divided into sections that actually feel like different sections of the city, because you got these different classes, you got these different societies. You got this section that has it's pretty much the redneck section of Chicago. You got all your RVs. You literally got some swamps. People go there to fish. You got these little camping areas, and then you got your more rural, urban areas where you got the high class people living in these hotels, or you got the ghetto where you got all these drug dealers and such. And so this feels like an actual living, breathing Chicago, and I have to give the developers credit for making it feel like I'm inhabiting and taking part of this world, not just roaming through it, but also hacking into it. However, being that it's such a diverse and rather large open world, I mean, it takes quite a while to traverse from one area of the city to another, whether it be on foot or even in a car. It takes quite a bit. So that is another thing that I feel the need to talk about, is how rather huge Chicago is in this game. But because of how huge and detailed it is, you're going to come across the occasional bug. And in my personal opinion, I feel like maybe some of the music that you get to hear whenever you jump into a car and you turn on the radio could have been a little bit diverse, because I feel like there were like, what, 5, 6, maybe 7 songs total. I mean, I wasn't expecting a full-on radio station system like in GTA, but they could have included a few more contemporary and classic soundtracks that could have fit the theme of the game. Now, in case you couldn't have guessed it by now, the Grand Theft Auto series is, of course, the video game franchise that I'm comparing Watch Dogs to, because it takes certain notes from the manual of developing a Grand Theft Auto game, in which you traverse the city doing missions, whether it be story or side missions, and you interact with the environment by either jacking people's cars, or creating some of your own rides, or taking the L train, and interacting with the world GTA style, to where you pass by people, they interact with you. However, this game, of course, takes the concept of hacking and pretty much just meshes the two together, and fortunately it works. I had so much fun going through the city and little icons appearing saying you can hack into this, you can manipulate with that, and I get to do some things in this game that in other games from years past I would often play through and be like, oh my god, it would be so cool if I could find a way to manipulate this one thing to my advantage. Like, the one thing that I cannot get enough of in this game is driving through a street, enemies tailing me, and then being able to manipulate the lights so that the lights on my on the street that I'm in turn green and everybody else's turns red, and then I could switch them and have them interject with the enemies that are chasing me, thus causing this wreck. Or sometimes I would just cause a wreck for fun. And so incorporating these elements of hacking into different things with the GTA style of gameplay is just so much fun. Interacting with the environment, profiling people and seeing what they're up to, like, oh my god, this person just recently donated a kidney, or this person's cheating on their spouse, and then sometimes hacking into their phones and a little dialogue box will appear and you can see their texts or you can hear their conversations. Sometimes what they're talking about or interacting with other people about will lead to certain side missions that you could do throughout the city. And so just meshing all these different things together worked perfectly well and made me feel like I was actually interacting with the city. Especially when you progress through the game and you actually gain even new abilities to interact with that city, whether it be blowing up steam pipelines or being able to hack into certain CTOS towers that can then unlock certain areas of Chicago that can lead you to gain some more hideouts, or it's just different ways to gain experience points. And another element that it models itself after GTA is, of course, the third-person shooter mechanics, because obviously hacking is just not going to do it sometimes. You're going to make some enemies and you're going to have to take some of these enemies out. And so meshing the hacking elements along with the shooter mechanics as well as some of the stealth mechanics, because sometimes shooting is also not an option, because then because of reasons in the story, you're not going to be able to simply just take out your enemy. You're going to have to work your way around a certain complex or just tail somebody without being caught. And the game manages to find ways to take the hacking abilities that you got and mesh them with those types of gameplay in which you can then strategize. Like, for example, you go into a complex, you have to take all these enemies out, but sometimes if you're willing to and if the game allows it, you can simply just take out all these enemies without ever having to pull the trigger. All you have to do is infiltrate the cameras, take some of the bosses out by disarming their communications, that way they don't radio in reinforcements, or you can make these generators explode that are right next to an enemy, and therefore it'll kill that enemy, and have different things happen, or just take out a certain amount of enemies in that type of style, and then you go in silently and take them out from behind. You can mix and match different styles of gameplay to be able to navigate through the narrative of this game, unless there's a certain exception where you are forcibly having to deal with certain stealth missions in which you can't be caught. Mainly one in the game that I feel is a bit of a standout, where you're inside of a prison and you have to work your way outside of the prison by simply just navigating through the facility without being caught. And it made for some interesting gameplay options, and that's one of the highlights of Watch Dogs, is that I was able, it always felt fun to me. It always felt fun interacting with the environment, and like I said, cruising down a street and blowing up a pipeline and taking out like 2 or 3 enemy cars and having it go in slow motion. It was just one of the most satisfying moments of the game for me, and being able to take out enemies Batman style by exploding a generator next to them and not having them not know what hit them, it's very satisfying. With that being said, there are certain things that, in my opinion, didn't really mesh with how grounded and the tone of this game really is, with the murder story and having to deal with hacking and how plausible this all feels. Even though they don't go into the very fine science of it, it still felt very grounded. Like, hey, just this past Christmas, Sony got hacked with the PlayStation Network, so how can this be outside of the realm of possibility? However, some elements in this game kind of were, in my opinion. First of all, despite imitating GTA with certain gameplay facets, one of those facets that didn't necessarily work was the driving. I felt like it was a little bit wonky at times. It didn't control right for some reason, at least for me it didn't. And then there are these 2 other elements that were crammed into this game that I really didn't see the need for. One of them is called a focus, which is pretty much the slow-mo effect, where you press down the button, time moves very slowly, and this allows you a window of opportunity to take down enemies when you're in a shootout of some kind. And this is cool and everything, but because I was already able to hack certain things in my environment and take out my enemies that way, I rarely, if not probably just once, used focus in my entire 25-hour playthrough of this game. I hardly used focus. And I'm not kidding. When I used it, it was because I accidentally pressed it thinking that it was going to reverse the camera whenever I was driving. Honest to God. That's most of the time whenever I did use it, that's the reason why. And when I actually intended to use it to be able to work my way out of a shootout, it was probably just once or so. Other than that, I would just hack the cameras, try to take out enemies as best as I can that way, because I found that to be much more fun. And then there are these things called digital trips, or these little mini games in the game, because outside of the main story, there's also these other activities that you can do throughout the city that did feel grounded, like chess, or even this drinking game that I thought was kind of fun, but still felt grounded because it felt like a legitimate thing that Aiden Pierce would do. However, the digital trips didn't, because it felt like something out of Saints Row. It felt like something that Saints Row would do rather than Watch Dogs. Watch Dogs felt much more serious and polished and clean, and then it did this. And don't get me wrong, I appreciated that they were in there because it was kind of fun, but make no mistake, I only messed with these digital trips once I was done with the actual story, because it just, I tried one and I was like, okay, this just felt too distracting for me. I'm going to do it after I beat the main game. And they're fun while I'm doing them, but in terms of fitting tonally with the story, just didn't click. I will admit though, I should probably cut those mini games, those digital trips, or the NVZ little video game within the video game that you can play on your digital phone in this game, in which you can shoot aliens that appear through virtual reality type of augmentation thing. Anyways, I should probably appreciate them a little bit more, because one thing that I can agree on, that I can say positively about those minigames, is that they offered variety. Because in my opinion, this is probably Watch Dogs' biggest problem, and that is that after about the first about the first third of the game, so a good 6, 7, 8 hours or so of the game, I started noticing something, and that is that the mission types started to repeat themselves one after another, and it started to get a little bit repetitive. Now what's funny though is that it never got boring. I will never say that Watch Dogs got boring, even until the very last QuickTime event. It never got boring. I always had fun doing some of these missions, because again, hacking into CTOS and messing with Chicago and bending it to my will digitally was fun. It was really, really fun going through these missions, and every time I had the opportunity to take out enemies by switching those traffic lights or blowing up a steam pipeline, it was very satisfying. But there's no denying that after a while, the game started to rely on this a little bit too much, that I started to see the same type of mission type over and over again. You either go through to this complex, you infiltrate it by either taking out the enemies or going in silently, your choice, or not. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Or you have to tail this car and then take it down once you don't have any need for it. And of course, once you take it down, certain enemy cars are going to be swarming you, and you need to either lose them or take them out by hacking into C2S. Which, like I said, is fun, but after a while, the game started to do it over and over and over again. And I didn't notice it, because for the first third of the game, all these mission types start to feel a bit fresh. They're fresh because you're experiencing them for the first time, but after a while, you take notice. Not just with the main story missions, but also with the side missions, because those side missions are pretty much variations of some of the stuff that you do for the main story anyway, and therefore I hardly found any need to do those side missions, because there's these things called fixer contracts or gang hideouts where, hey, guess what the gang hideout side mission is? You go to this complex, take out the enemies. Fixer contracts, you need to take down this car. Or what are the other type of side missions? Crime detective, which in my opinion was the more flexible one, because sometimes it'll say right there, "Oh, a crime is being detected in your area." You go to this environment, you profile somebody, you figure out whether or not they're the victim or the criminal, and once you figure that down, you take down the criminal, and you get more points for taking down the criminal, and even more points if you manage to have the victim be uninjured. And those were the most fun for me because they were the most accessible. You don't have to do anything that big or anything that complex. You just go through the city, and whenever it pops up, you go there. And I did those most of the time. But after a while, those side missions just felt more of the story missions, only with less context. I mean, hardly any kind of background is given to these missions. They're just there to give you more stuff to do and to level up your character and gain XP. And when you do that, you gain a skill point that you can then use on your skill tree. And this skill tree, I feel the need to call it a pseudo skill tree, in which certain branches of the tree will allow you to either carry more explosives or deal some more damage. But then after a while, those branches will veer off into giving you more abilities rather than to actually making you stronger, which, in my opinion, I prefer not to do. I prefer skill trees that actually give me the choice to become stronger, to level up my defense or my speed or my attack, which is mainly saved for RPG games, which I realize that. But Watch Dogs, I feel, simply just gives you more abilities, some of which I really appreciated because, again, it allowed me to do more with the CTOS system throughout Chicago. But then others I really did not even bother with because I'm like, I'm rarely going to use that because of my style of playing this game, because of my gameplay style. I'm not going to use certain abilities in the skill tree, so I'm just going to save up my points for other branches of the skill tree. But then when I got to them, I'm kind of like, I wish I could do this other thing, but by force that branch says no, that is the next step in leveling up your character and fulfilling that skill tree. Plus, along with that, besides spending points, you also have to do certain requirements with the side missions, and because I hardly did them, let's just say I hardly invested myself in this skill tree. I just focused on some of the things that I knew I was going to use for my gameplay style, and I left the other ones alone. But of course, that's more of a personal thing. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer to the skill tree. It's up to your play style, to your play preference. And for me, I felt like some more options to the skill tree would have been nice. But beyond that, there's plenty of other stuff to do if you want to 100% the game. Like I said, I didn't feel the need to do that because after a while, the stuff started to get repetitive. But if you want to complete some of those fixer contracts, as well as gain some of the collectibles throughout the city, like the burner phones or the suitcases to take down a criminal human trafficking ring, there's plenty of other stuff to do. There's audio logs that give you some more backstory to the game, to the main story. There's also that, and there's just so much other things to do within Chicago, including online contracts. Online contracts is this game's fancy title for multiplayer, pretty much. And basically what they did is that they took the multiplayer component and integrated it into the actual city of Chicago, in which it can kind of, come in and out with the main story, which is why as soon as somebody was hacking me early on in the game, I turned that shit off because it was distracting me quite an awful lot from the main story. So if you're not a huge fan of that like myself, turn it off, beat the main story, and then indulge yourself into multiplayer, which is pretty much what I did. Because when I play a game that has multiplayer and a single story campaign, I do the single story mode, and then I go into multiplayer in the main menu. So the fact that they integrated it into the single player and it's automatically on, so when you're playing, something's gonna pop up. It's kind of distracting to me, but it does give you the option to turn it off. And so once I was done with the story mode, I turned it back on and tried to see what the multiplayer was all about. And it's a nice little time killer, but I never really found it all that engaging. There's these different modes in which you can select yourself, in which you can hack other people. You can do this mode in which you have to retrieve a file. It's pretty much capture the flag in a way, but you need to retrieve the file and before other players do. And of course, whenever a player retrieves the file, you can then kill that person and retrieve the file for yourself and take it back to where you need to in order to complete the match, as well as races where you race across through the city in a car or in a bike, your choice. And there's these different options that are somewhat variations of some of the things that you would do in the main game, but this time you get to do it with other people. Plus a free roam section in which you can pretty much just do whatever you want with other people, up to I believe 8 players. And again, it's a nice little time waster, but I never found it to be all that engaging for me personally. The only mode that I did find kind of interesting is the one where you do hack other people, or you get hacked yourself, and it's up to you to discover who exactly is hacking you by profiling them with your phone. The reason why I find it so interesting is because, much like another Ubisoft property, it reminded me an awful lot of Assassin's Creed and their multiplayer, and how in that multiplayer you needed to figure out who was the assassin, who was tailing you, and who you need to kill. Similar kind of concept with the multiplayer for Watch Dogs in that specific mode, and that's why when I was playing it, I found that to be the most fun out of all of them, because all the other ones felt a little bit rudimentary, so profiling other people as well as trying to figure out who was profiling me, kind of fun. I'm not necessarily claiming that I've played all of Ubisoft's IPs, but I'm starting to feel a formula in which every time they try something new, that first game, it's going to be pretty good, but it has some issues that are kind of significant, whether it be with its story or its gameplay, but I see something there. I see something there that has humongous potential should they do a sequel, which, trust me, this game leaves it open for a sequel, whether it be continuing the narrative of this one or taking place in a different setting, because obviously they can take the story or the tone or the theme of this game in different directions. They could do it like Assassin's Creed, or they could do it like the Far Cry games, in which the tone and the feel and the theme is the same, but every story is different, every environment can be different, and they could do that with Watch Dogs, because the endings heavily implies that. But should they do that, I hope that they bring a stronger characterization to their protagonist, and of course introducing some variety to the mission types, regardless of how fun they could be. So I give Watch Dogs a solid 8 out of 10. It's a good game, but it's not perfect, but it does breed potential to a brand new franchise that I can get myself into. So let me know what you guys thought of Watch Dogs if you have played it, but you have not, and would like to purchase the game after watching my review, then be sure to use the link in the description below. It would really help me out a lot. Just make sure that when you get it, it's not broken like mine is. It's a little stub right here. Look at this. Yeah, that too. Gotta order myself a new case for this game, because it broke. Anyways, let me know what you guys thought. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys next time.